Hello, and welcome to Connect and Collaborate. I am Alex Hopkins, your on-air producer, and today is episode 2 with the American Council of Engineering Companies of Colorado. And so we are going to be talking about QBS Colorado Coalition, and that is qualifications-based selection. And we're going to learn today why using a QBS process when hiring professional design consultants, including engineers, architects, and land surveyors, can result in better design outcomes. And I have two wonderful guests in studio with me. I have Dave DeFulvio. He is a principal and a licensed land surveyor with Farnsworth Group. He has worked on some of Colorado's largest projects, including those within the municipal, state, federal, and private sectors. His expertise is specifically highlighted in property boundary and right-of-way matters. Dave serves on a variety of community and industry committees, including as a representative of the ACEC of Colorado on the QBS Colorado Coalition. So welcome, Dave. How are you doing today?
Doing great, thank you.
Wonderful. We're glad you're here with us. And I also have Linda Waterhouse. She's a licensed architect in Colorado with more than 30 years of professional practice. She's a senior associate at Marks Okubio and Associates, and consulting firm specializing in the evaluation of new and existing construction projects. Her project management experience includes commercial, industrial, healthcare, criminal justice, scientific research, and transportation. She serves on the QBS Colorado Coalition as a member of the American Institute of Architects of Colorado. So welcome, Linda.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yes. So you both have extensive backgrounds here. Actually, we were talking about it just off air a little bit, and between the two of you, we have over 70 years of experience, right? And that's exciting. Should I not say that? Was that too far?
Maybe a little bit more, yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. So I guess let's talk about exactly what QBS is. I'm going to throw this one to you, Linda.
Sure.
If you don't mind getting into a big explanation of exactly what that entails.
Well, I think to fully understand it is to just understand how it came to be, how it came to pass. The Brooks Act was passed in 1972. So that makes it almost 50 years old. It's been around a long time. What happened before that? Well, back in prior to 1939, the government used to use their own people to do projects. And then as time went on, they realized that actually bringing in private sector consultants who specialize in these various projects is much better, more efficient than to try to have government employees trying to do everything. So that changed initially back in 1939, and they were still kind of feeling their way through the process. So at first they tried basically dictating the fees. In other words, they had a process where they were trying to hold the fees at roughly 6% of the cost of construction. Well, that's almost like the buyer telling the seller how much they're supposed to sell their widgets for. That really didn't go over well, and it resulted in a lot of confusion and a lot of manipulation of the process in order for people to get an adequate fee for the work they're doing. So after trying a couple different things and talking to people, 1972 rolls around, and that's when the Brooks Act was born. And basically, the Brooks Act comes down to three cornerstone points. One is to publicly announce all the requirements for the project. Usually, it's done in an RFP or an RFQ, and it's public publications. The second cornerstone is to then negotiate the contracts so that all parties are involved in determining the fee based on competence and qualifications, hence the name qualifications-based selection. You're basing it on qualifications. And thirdly, and this is equally as important, cornerstone, and that is that it's supposed to be done at a fair and reasonable price for all parties. In other words, it's not the seller that's demanding the price, but everybody's sitting down together and discussing the matter and coming up with something that's fair. It worked out to be such a good idea that today nearly all 50 states, I believe it's up to 46 now states, have adopted a statewide QBS law to be followed. So it's mandatory now in the federal and nearly mandatory in every state across the country. So
including Colorado.
Including Colorado. That's, yes, including Colorado.
Important.
The Colorado's law has been around for almost 40 years, so it's been around a long time. And when something is around for that long a time, it's because it works, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would imagine.
Yeah. So I want to go through some ideas of how do you determine the criteria, because again, we're talking about the qualifications. So how do you determine the qualifications? So I got a little list here of some of the things that are typically looked at, and it'll vary depending on what the project is. But some of the things is, for example, specialized experience. So if it's a kind of a unusual project that requires some specialized experience, one of the projects that I will talk about a little bit later is the Colorado State Capitol, when they just recently did the renovation on the dome. That's very specialized. Not everybody's doing that every day. So that's an example of something that's very specialized. Another piece of criteria that might be looked at is the qualifications. Is your team, are they all licensed professionals? Do they have additional certifications? What are those certifications? And might they be applicable to your particular project? So again, you're looking at trying to get a specialized team that's customized for what you are trying to do. Another one is the capacity, and this is kind of important, especially right now, because construction is up. Everybody's busy. And so you want to have somebody on board who has the time to do your project and the time to give it the attention that it needs in order to be done well. So capacity is important. In other words, is their approach to quality? What's the quality assurance? All firms have a range of employees from entry-level, interns, mid-level, upper management, and so forth. And what is their quality process for checking things and doing things correctly? You want to look at their past performance. Have they been successful in past, or have there been problems, maybe litigation, who knows? But you want to make sure their past performance is good. Another one you might look at is proximity. You might want a firm that is local.
Familiar with the area that they're working in.
Familiar with the area and the climate and the requirements and the regulations and the codes and so forth that might be specialized to your area. For an example, might be if you're building something in California, you want to make sure you have somebody who has built in earthquake seismic zones, not somebody who is living somewhere or working somewhere where it's something that they don't typically do, or maybe never have even done. So that's what we're talking about, proximity. And then you want to find out what we call value engineering approaches, which is to evaluate some of the other options to solve your problem. There's always more than one way to do something, and sometimes there's some advantages to taking. Client may approach you and say, I want this way, but after a little discussion and evaluation, you might say, hey, but if we do it that way, we might be able to do blah, 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 whatever. So those are some of the criteria that we're looking for in the qualification-based selection. Is price important? Absolutely, it's important. Yes. But it's important to both sides. It's important to the buyer and it's important to the seller. You cannot force a seller to sell something for less than they can do it for. They'll go out of business, and then you lose your potential services. You know? So you don't want people. You want everybody. Everybody should be able to do the job and be happy and successful. So it's very important to bring everybody in. As I said earlier, when the government first tried to set the fee before they had the QBS, where they set the fee, there you're running into a problem again, where the seller is setting the fee for the buyer, and it just doesn't work that way. So that's kind of the background on QBS and why it's come to pass. And like I said, it's been around for almost 50 years now, which I think makes a pretty clear statement as to this really does work. And we really are, as I said, it's required on the federal level, and it's required on the state level, and we really encourage municipalities where maybe they don't have a law, but to go ahead and follow it anyway. 'Cause you don't have to have a law to follow it. Private sector does it in an informal basis. They pick who they want to use, and then they typically do negotiate with them. So it's being done by the private sector as well, but But again, it's not a mandated law for them.
Well, and that's kind of where I wanted to ask you a question about that. So I know it's not a mandated law, and you said there were about 46 states now, so not every state has it. But I would imagine if you are going to be in this field and move around to different states, there's lots of other things you have to look at too. But for this specifically, is there kind of an industry standard across the board for everyone, or does it really vary based on your location as far as adhering to these rules?
Wherever the project is being built will determine whether or not QBS is a requirement. So you could, for example, be an architect in Colorado and do a project, say, in Kansas, and Kansas has a QBS law, therefore you need to follow the QBS law.
Okay.
And architects and engineers are licensed by state, but generally we're licensed in multiple states. We're allowed reciprocity into other states, so most of us are licensed in multiple states.
Wonderful.
Usually, the Brooks Act itself, the federal law,
Yeah.
is very short and sweet, 2 pages.
Oh, okay.
And the most states that adopted model theirs right after that. So they're almost very, very similar. Some states take it to extremes and add a lot of stuff to it, but the bottom line is it's a qualifications-based selection process for procurement.
Awesome. All right. So that federal laws, I would say, is the standard for most. So even even the states that don't have something extra, they still follow that Brooks law, correct?
If there's federal funding in their projects, yes.
Wonderful.
They're required to by law.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So as a taxpayer, how does this affect me, right? I'm not in the world of engineering. I don't know that I'm going to ask anyone to do any construction projects for me personally anytime soon. I need a lot more money to ask for something like that.
Yeah.
But as a taxpayer, this has to have some consequences on me, right? Benefits, maybe? Do you mind asking that or answering that for me, Dave?
Sure.
Yeah.
This is an appropriate time. We have so much on the ballot for wanting people to spend extra money in their taxes. I'm a taxpayer, and just like everybody else, and I'm pretty tight with my money, to say the least.
Yeah, good.
Well, what can I say? I've had my own business for a while, and it's a bootstrap 101 when you're starting. But
yeah, so you're pretty money savvy then, I would imagine.
But I also recognize quality and value, and there's a huge correlation there. And I think, why is it important to me as a taxpayer? Because I want the absolute best for my dollar. I don't want to give the government any more than I have to, but whatever I do, I want the best value in return for that money. So, when you look at the projects that go into these, and we're just talking about projects, road projects, building projects, or whatever.
Yeah.
And again, I think we'll talk more on the public side because the law governs public projects for the most part. When you, as Linda said, the QBS process goes through an advertised, so anybody can submit, so it's wide open, there's no controversy, whatever. There's a published set of criteria. Here's what they're looking for. And they go through and ask, and sometimes they'll even tell you how they're going to score you, but they review everybody's proposals or qualifications that they come in, they rank them. Sometimes they select, most of the time, if it's a good-sized project, they'll interview the top 3, perhaps, and then they pick, and they select a consultant, any design consultant for anything. It's, we talked about architects, engineers, surveyors, landscape architects. But the key is they're selected first based on their qualifications. Then they sit down with the owner, the client, and negotiate the final scope of work. They may be proposing and talking about one that the client put in RFP or RFQ, but what goes in the contract, which is related to whatever fee they're going to propose, is negotiated. And that's the key, because when you look at design costs on an average project, I'm not going to pick between horizontal or vertical, but roughly about 10%, give or take a couple percent, of the total construction cost of the project. So if you have a $10 million project, okay, you got $1 million in design costs, roughly, just roughly. Why would you bid that 10% And here's why, because that the quality of the design affects the quality of the construction.
Right.
And the quality of that design also affects the life cycle maintenance costs and operating costs of whatever it is you're doing, whether it be a road facility or a building facility. Those operational and what we call life cycle costs, let's say 40 years, not quite the lengths of the Brooks Act. That's huge. And together, that design piece of that is only 1% of that total life cycle cost. So wouldn't you want the best design and the best construction to save you money over those 40 years?
Absolutely.
And a good example is on a building project that, let's say it's $10 million, which nowadays isn't huge, I guess.
Which is sad because it's still unfathomable to me.
You could have a really innovative, neat piece of that design. I don't care whether it's the HVAC system or the materials or whatever. Something that's really neat about that building that's going to save $1 million over the life of that building, or 40 years, and it might cost $100,000 more up front.
Okay.
Okay. If you were going to low bid, you're going to put generally to win a project, you have to be the absolute lowest dollar. How do you do that? Well, you don't go overboard on, you kind of minimize rather than maximize your effort. You put lower cost people, less experienced people working on that project, and so forth.
Okay,
So
so maybe more apprenticeships at your company would be working on that, so it's cheaper labor.
It could be whatever.
Exactly.
And the Brooks Act itself was created primarily to solve the problem of poor quality, excessive change orders, and project delays.
Okay.
And those cost money.
Oh yeah.
Both up front and depending on the quality of design and construction, the life cycle. So I think, that's why the state of Colorado, like 46 other states, mandate the use of QBS for their design consultants on projects. If there's state money, if it's a state project, they choose based on qualifications for that same reason. All the major high-profile projects we've got, right now the National Western Center is a good example.
Yes.
There's a good example is a commissioning request for qualifications on the street right now. And this is for multiple projects from CSU, right? There are three in particular: Water Resources Center, which is an $85 million project; Animal Health Building, which is a $60 million project; and the CSU Center, which is another $48.5 million project. Completely qualifications-based selection. They're going to select somebody to do this work based on qualifications.
Just to clarify for myself, are those three separate projects, or would one person go in to propose to work on all three of those?
That's exactly the case here. It's one submittal.
Okay.
One team will be selected, or company.
Wow.
To do those. And it's just the commissioning piece of that. It's not the design.
Right.
And commissioning isn't technically even a licensed part of the profession. It's a little debatable.
Huh.
But the value of choosing based on qualifications is very strong in the state. And the federal, there's no question about it, they just mandate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So can we talk a little bit about what this would look like going through the process? Does that question make sense? If I'm going to the table requesting to do this job, particularly the National Western, these three projects, one overall project, three different building complexes, what do I need to do and sit down and make sure I have a list of for my people, for the who I'm presenting to?
Well, go ahead.
I'll start, and you can jump
sure.
in too. This is more in Linda's space than mine. But the request for proposals is published, and it's available by anybody. There's criteria for submittal. They talk about the scope of the work that they're asking for and what we would be contracted to do, right? Then they go through and also say, well, here's what we want to see in your submittal. So you submit a proposal to them, which is basically a statement of qualifications. And they're going through, you mentioned some of those criteria earlier.
Yeah.
The state has a pretty well rigid set of criteria that they want to elaborate on. And you go through all that stuff, and there's a little bit more. You talk about the specifics of the project and your experience, what you bring to the table. And then they even show you the scoring sheets on what they're going to rank you on, and both on the qualifications submittal itself, which is just like a proposal, and then an interview. They will interview teams for that. And
I did not realize
they
it
give you
was-
the criteria, the weighting, the scoring, and
Yeah.
everything. So it's a wide open process.
It's like an Olympics game, right?
And it's very transparent too.
Wonderful.
All
So-
this information can be gathered so that a team that maybe didn't get it wants to see what happened.
Yeah.
Was I unfairly treated? And it's all very transparent as to the process. Once you get past, I'll pick it up where Dave left off. Once you go through the interviewing process, they then rank the teams. Now, maybe you had 3 to 5 teams typically in this process, depending on the size of the project. And you'll have one ranked number 1, ranked number 2, and 3. Then you get to the fun part. Then you get to the negotiating part, and that's where you sit down, and that's where you talk about the specifics and the scope of the work, and both sides get to say what they need. In other words, the municipality or the government says this is what we need, and then the design team say, well, this is what it's going to cost to produce it, and this is how we're going to produce it. And if they're not in sync, then that's why we use the word negotiation, because then it goes back and forth. Let me give you sort of a hypothetical example. Let's say you go into a grocery store and you say to the grocer, the owner, I need a dozen eggs, but I only have $1, so I want you to give me a dozen eggs for $1. And the grocery store person says, well, it costs me $1.50 just to get the eggs into the store, and that doesn't even count my making a profit. So if you want a dozen eggs, it's going to cost you $2. But if you can live with only 6 eggs, I can sell them to you for $1. Okay, so that's kind of the back and forth that starts to occur. That a lot of times people want more than they can afford. Sometimes they're on, and sometimes they're spot on. Sometimes they're not. The AE team, and when I say AE, I mean architects and engineers. They can come back and they can look at it. They can make suggestions. Well, if we did this instead of that, we so forth. We reduce that. That's what we call scope. We're reducing the scope. Then we can get to where you want to get, and you go back and forth. Now, granted, the government entities, the money gets allocated from legislatures and so forth, so they may have a fixed budget. So they'll come in and say, well, this is all we have.
But you want to get the most for that fixed budget.
But you want to get the most for that fixed budget, and you want good quality for that fixed budget.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's why we talk about qualifications, because you want people that can. How many times have you watched the local news and they've told you some story about some poor homeowner who hired some guy to do some little renovation, fix-up jobs around the house, and then halfway through the job, the contractor disappeared and the homeowner is all upset. Why did the homeowner pick that contractor? Probably because he was the cheapest.
You generally get what you pay for.
Yeah, and that's one thing we always say in QBS, you get what you pay for.
Yeah.
And the AEs are not the enemy. They're actually your friend. They want to work with you. They want to produce the best possible project.
Yeah.
And for the right price. And so that's the whole point of negotiating. Just another little story. I remember about 6 weeks ago, Hurricane Florence. We all remember Florence. It hit primarily South Carolina.
Yeah.
And I just remember seeing this one video on TV. They showed it several times. You probably saw it too. It was an aerial view of a bunch of houses along the ocean, and all the houses were wiped out except one.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
I do.
Okay.
I do remember
that house was designed and constructed for a storm. It probably cost a little bit more,
But
it
survived.
It was the one standing.
True.
And that's
We
what
will
we're talking
be
about.
Right back. Stay with us here and Connect and Collaborate. Be sure to like and subscribe our YouTube page while you're here. We'll be right back talking with Dave DeFulvio and Linda Waterhouse. Stay with us. Welcome back to Connect and Collaborate. Once again, I'm Alex Hopkins, your on-air producer, and today we have episode 2 with the American Council for our Engineering Companies of Colorado, ACEC Colorado, as we lovingly call it here. And today we are talking about using qualifications-based selection for better design outcomes, or as we've been calling it in studio, QBS. I have with me again Dave DeFulvio. He is a principal and licensed land surveyor with Farnsworth Group and has wonderful extensive background including some of Colorado's largest projects, as well as Linda Waterhouse. She is a senior associate at Marks Ocubio and Associates, and also a licensed architect here in Colorado as well. And you guys have your engineering backgrounds, and you brought a lot of experience into Colorado projects. And so I'm excited to talk more about this QBS with you guys. So, we talked a little bit in the last segment about how not everyone uses this, right? There is the Brooks Law that is federal. So there are some very minimal, I would say, standards here that we go across industry-wide. But why doesn't everyone use this as a standard procurement procedure?
Well, as we said earlier, it's a federal law, so on all federally funded projects, it will be implemented. At the state level, there are approximately 46 states out of 50 that have enacted a state-level QBS law, and it has pretty much the same verbiage as in the federal. And I do believe there are a few local municipalities, larger ones, that have also enacted a version of it as well. So it actually is fairly widely used. In the private sector, and it's used in more of an informal basis, but it's still kind of used, where the private sector, they'll pick and choose who they want to work with, and then they'll sit down and they'll negotiate the finer points with it. So it actually is implemented quite a bit, but not universally. And we do encourage smaller towns to start considering using it, because we really think that they would benefit from them. We realize that they're always afraid that it's a blank check to the consultants, but it's just really quite the opposite. It's an opportunity to really work with the consultants and get it honed in on what you really need at the cost that you really need. And yeah, is price important? Absolutely. It is absolutely important, but it's important for everybody. It's important for the municipality that is buying the services, and it's important to the consultant firm that is providing the services. If you force them to bid it unreasonably low, then you're going to pay consequences for it. Architects and engineers are not a commodity like you'd buy in a store. They are not all the same. They have different specialties and backgrounds, and you have to look at them individually, and that's why we really feel it's important to look at the qualifications and interview and find the team that is going to serve your project the very best.
Yeah, and that's just being a good steward of the dollars that you're going to spend, especially at the public level. But getting back to why doesn't everybody use this as a standard, we can speculate, right? There's a lot of speculation out there. My guess is that most municipalities, and we'll talk about municipalities, state, local governments, or whatever, towns and districts and so forth, they know that if there's federal money, they're supposed to do that and follow that process. And that's a process. That's all it is.
Right.
And with there's state money, that they some do know, some don't, quite frankly. And I think the state of Colorado is great at that. The CDOT and the state architect's office and so forth, all the institutions, no problem. They follow it to a T. But anybody receiving state grants, sometimes there's a question mark there, and I think supposed to by the Mini Brooks Act that Colorado has. But I think, quite frankly, that there's just an unawareness, and they haven't been educated. Whoever's putting these proposals together, they were published RFPs, and it could come from city councils or whatever, that, hey, we just want the lowest cost. And, when you look at the lowest cost, you God help you. That's all I can say is, well, people do business with people, not companies, right? And they're not commodities. Everybody is different. Every person that's going to work on their project has varying degrees of experience. And there's a cost difference there too. Everybody needs to be able to serve their client. Believe me, as consultants, we really desperately want to just thrill the hell out of our clients and do a damn good job.
Oh, yeah.
But we also have to make money. We're not going to be around next year to do that. So anyway, why don't they use it that's what the coalition is about, the QBS Coalition. We're all about education and advocacy, and we're trying to hopefully promote the benefits
Okay.
But I think there's a lot of myths going into that too.
Yeah.
Well, let's jump right into these myths then. So, but before we do that, I want to kind of wrap my head a little bit more around this. If I'm looking at new construction, just a home, right? That's where I'm going with this one.
It's a perfect example.
Yes. Well, thank you. But I'm looking at it and say, up front, I know I want solar panels. It's going to be costly up front, but in the long run, I'm saving money on my energy bill, right? So that's kind of where we're headed with this. You may need to put a little bit more money up front for something that will save you money down the road. Is that essentially kind of what we're looking at?
Absolutely. We refer to that as life cycle costs.
Life cycle costs. Wonderful.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. It's a little more grasping
And that
for
goes
me.
into the quality of the construction, which is directly related to the quality of design.
Yeah.
And a good example, my daughter bought a new home in the metro area. I won't say where, what home builder. It's a brand new home, track builder. And overall the house is great for the money and really a good house. But their process, it was very clear to me as they were building it, they just let their subcontractors build a bunch of crap and go back and fix it later on their dime. And there's, you get to the closing and all of a sudden you're doing a walkthrough and there's some major issues with drywall and framing that they should have caught, but they said, don't worry about it, they'll fix it. So the whole mentality of get it done right the first time plays out.
Interesting. Okay. So I will keep an eye out for that as a consumer. But let's jump into these myths and facts about QBS, right? And let's talk a little bit about accountability here.
Yeah, accountability is one of the first things that always comes up. But get back to what we said before. The process is extremely transparent.
Yeah.
The RFPs, which is the initial announcement of the project to the public, to whoever wants to bid on it, is a public announcement. It's done in journals that carry all these federal announcements. Everybody knows where it is. It's no secret, and they're not hiding it in some obscure newspaper or something. So there is no issue with accountability. I mean, it's transparent. It's out there. The process, everybody, I mean, Dave went through earlier the different criteria in the RFP. They'll list what is the criteria. They'll list the weighting of the criteria, in other words, which questions are more important than others, and so forth. And that's how they devised a little scoring system to rate the proposals. They may follow it up with additional questions to the process, and then ultimately it goes on to an interview. But it's all very accountable, and the public has access to that information. So nobody's being sneaky about anything.
Yeah, most of the proposals that get submitted are publicly available for review if somebody wants to go and look at them.
Okay, so so the request for proposals is very public. You're going to do yourself a disservice to not put that out there, right? So as many people can see it as possible. But when you return your proposal to the company, that is also public to every other industry.
Usually.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
don't think I've seen any that weren't.
I don't believe so. No.
Okay. I guess I just thought it would be more secretive. I don't know.
No, usually the other people have better things to do than go and look at these proposals.
Okay. I don't know. I feel like I would
Except
chop
us.
somebody's. Yeah. So this can be kind of burdensome for small communities, though, right?
Do you want to take that one? Or?
No. I'll start and you can jump in. Not at all. I mean, you have to go through some process, and the smaller entities or communities or whatever that just put out what we call a cost proposal RFP, they'll generally have a statement of work or a scope of work in there that they created, somebody that they think this is exactly what somebody needs to price, and they ask for a price proposal. So they sometimes mix in some qualifications. But they want your prices and your what's it going to cost. And it's a valid question. They need to know about what it's going to cost. We would advertise they do that homework before they go through this process and figure out what their budget is. But nonetheless, when they do that, you still go through a process to go create the scope of work, which if they're not an engineer or if they've not been in those shoes to do that, they're a little bit out of their league a little bit sometimes, and they're going to be relying on somebody for help probably. You still publish it. That's the same process. You still review proposals coming back in. That's the same process. You're just going to put more weight if they ask for a cost proposal to the cost. And again, remember my comments about inexperienced people, low cost, blah, blah, blah. You have to minimize the approach rather than maximize it. Then they pick that. Then they try to probably just write a contract using that scope of work. Ideally, we would hope that they would have a discussion with whoever they picked and say, well, we noticed, we thought about it, and maybe we think we ought to add this or add that and blah, 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 or take this out and take that out and maybe adjust a little bit. But at the end of the day, you're going through the same process.
Right.
It's absolutely no more cumbersome, and we would advocate that it's a better process. It's a much better because it's all transparent. Everybody's going through the same process. It's apples to apples. You don't have somebody second guessing the number of hours or meetings to do something. You know,
yeah, I was just going to add to that with regard to burdensome to small communities.
Yeah.
And this is maybe a little plug for QBS, but we're here to help small communities that don't do this all the time, and we appreciate, especially in Colorado, there's lots of smaller towns and communities that aren't doing capital construction projects every year or multiple projects every year. QBS, we do have a website. We have a ton of resource information on the website, and we also offer the service of helping them write their RFPs. And we don't charge for that. So that's a free service.
Wow.
That we will help you write the RFP, and we don't bid on things. So there's no issue of conflict of interest, if you will. There, we are available, and we'll talk about this again, I think, at the end of this segment. But that for the smaller communities, we are there to help them get through this, because we understand that they don't do this all the time. Big cities, Denver, yeah, they do it all the time. They've got a whole staff that's used to this kind of stuff. But you get to the smaller towns, we appreciate it. It might even be a little bit intimidating. Of course, everybody's always afraid that somebody's going to take advantage of them. And that's not the intention of the process. The process is actually help the communities get the best value for their dollar.
Wonderful. Yeah. So I just want to point out that the website is QBS Colorado.org. Again, that's QBS Colorado.org. So nice and simple to remember. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you guys have a toolbox of templates for procurement, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And, I'm sure amongst lots of other tools there to have to help local towns and companies. That's wonderful. I love that you guys do that. And again, no competition there.
There's no competition.
Yeah.
We don't. The QBS does not bid on projects. We're there for the public good.
Wonderful. That is beautiful. Well, let's talk a little bit more about these myths and facts. So with this, it decreases competition, right? With the QBS. No, it does not. It increases.
No, that's another one of our little myths. So it does not decrease. And actually, because of the qualifications, it really opens it up to special niche firms that maybe have a special skill or an expertise that can be applicable to projects. A lot of times it's true, the big firms have the budgets, in-house budgets, if you will, to put together massive proposals. But when you're issuing proposals with very distinct qualifications, and in some cases, as I say, maybe even niche qualifications, that really makes the process open to everyone who can qualify. Again, gets back to qualifications, but even those smaller firms that have the qualifications and can go up against the big guns, if you will, the QBS process basically levels the playing field, I believe.
Right.
Okay.
And it allows people to get creative. If they really want that project for that client, they can get really creative. I mean, those of us in the consultant world spend a lot of time putting together winning proposals. It costs us a lot of money. We're careful what we go after, what we want, and we want to make sure that we're a good fit for the project and for the client. And they want the same thing. And the more you open that up, if it's purely qualifications, you're basically asking the consultant community, hey, tell me why you're the best that I should choose for this project. Not in so many words, but that's kind of it. And,
right.
And then if you as an owner or client put out a scope of work that really isn't quite all that great, and you're asking for a cost proposal, and I can almost guarantee you there's a certain percentage of the higher quality firms that probably will pass. They don't want to waste their time because they know that there's going to be somebody undercutting based on a low scope of work and a low estimate, and they just don't want to be in that boat of providing that level of service.
I gotcha.
So it increases competition, actually.
That's awesome. Which is good for the economy when you have good competition like that.
It's good for everybody.
Yeah, it's mutually beneficial across the board.
Absolutely.
So another maybe myth here is there a higher cost associated with this QBS? I'm guessing that it's actually a lower cost, maybe in the long run.
Yes. That's how you look at it.
Yeah.
Well, because the qualifications are clearly laid out, it is a decreased cost, we believe, because it's everybody understands what they're looking for and provide it for them, and you don't have firms, again, big gun type firms, trumping the smaller firms because they're so big and they do a million different things. Here, the scope of work is clearly defined, and the people that can best satisfy that scope of work are the ones that are going to shine through. Yeah.
Remember I talked about in the federal arena, the main reason the Brooks Act came about was because they had poor quality on their projects. They were experiencing excessive change orders and project delays. All those cost money. And it's either during construction or after construction when you're trying to occupy a building or a facility or a road, whatever. And you're going to spend a little bit more maybe up front, but a lot less in maintenance and operation. So that, again, you can sit there and shortchange everything and pay now or pay later.
Right, exactly.
So,
yeah, it all comes back around in the end, I would imagine, as an overall cost. Well, and I like this because it is really nice, as you mentioned a couple times about the niche market that you may have, right? And so, I again, it increases the competition, which is really nice. It puts that out there for every company to see this and to be on the same page with knowing what they need to bring to the board, right? It's all one standard, and we can go ahead and I know that I need this, and I need this, and I need this before we even get in front of this board. So that's lovely that it's all on the same page. I like that idea. Yeah. And I would imagine that if I am going up against a firm that I've competed against before, and I see that there's, for example, the Dome, right, in the Capitol, it's a very niche thing that you don't see that every day. So if I know that my company, we do amazing work in that field house, I'm probably, other companies might back off a little bit, right, because they know that maybe that's, oh, you know what, Alex and Associates, they do the Dome thing, right?
Well, yeah, and I think I like that example because it is a state project. QBS was used to procure the team that did
wonderful.
that. And it is a very, very specialized thing. Here you got a state capitol, historic register type building. It's built from marble that was quarried in Colorado, and they put this beautiful gold leaf on the dome to represent the gold rush days that occurred in Colorado. I mean, it has wonderful history to it. Yeah. It was built back in around the 1890s. So even the methodology of building that building is not really the way we build them, the materials and so forth that we build today. So your typical AE firm doesn't even really do that. I mean, they do more the modern construction of today.
That's true.
So that project really required a team of architects and engineers that specifically had experience in gold leafing. Not many firms actually have experience in gold leafing. Gold leafing and iron construction, because it's actually an iron frame underneath that dome, and how to weld. I mean, portions of it are deteriorating.
Dome. Not so much just a wall; it's a dome. It's curved.
Yeah, and there were sections that were deteriorating and had to be re-welded and new pieces. And it really was a very specialized firm, a classic example of the kind of project that you most definitely want QBS for, to get a team of people that have experience in that type of structure. And as you can see, they did a beautiful job. The renovation on it was just wonderful.
Oh yeah, gorgeous. Yeah. Absolutely gorgeous. It's one of my favorite buildings in Colorado. So yeah, we have the niche market, but this also works for very general building, right?
Absolutely.
Any construction. So is the process any different for if you're, say, looking to build an apartment complex rather than the Capitol, right? And renovating on top of new construction?
Not really. The only thing that really is different is the qualifications that you identify for the project.
Okay.
You know, so even something as simple, say, as an apartment building, you probably want to hire somebody who's done other apartment buildings. You don't want to hire someone who maybe has only done churches, for an example. So that might be a qualification that you include in the process. Somebody that has experience in multifamily housing type projects. So even what you might think is mundane, all projects, you want people to have experience in your type that understand your building, understand how your building functions, because after the building is built, the owner has to use the building, and it has to be functional for their business, whatever their business is, whether it's a hospital or an office building or whatever, an airport. It's got to be functional for the users of the building, because, as I said, the AE team, when it's done, they go away.
And if you're private and it's your money, you could kind of do what you want because you're going to live with it. But if it's public money, it's somebody else's money, and you better make sure that whoever you hire at least has done something like that before.
I would,
and you're just going to get a better product no matter what. And the more you elevate that process to get maybe the best at that, what a wonderful bang for the buck.
Well, and I imagine this coalition can help you get your company's name out there too, right? With helping you make sure you've got your correct qualifications for the QBS process. So let's talk about the coalition here. I know that you've got quite a few partnering organizations with that. If you don't mind giving us a list.
Again, this is a group effort to educate and advocate, right? Because we all consultants, for the most part, in the design space, recognize the value of it. So the coalition's partnering organizations are obviously the American Council of Engineering Companies of Colorado, ACEC, the American Institute of Architects of Colorado, Professional Land Surveyors of Colorado, National Society of Professional Engineers of Colorado, American Society of Civil Engineers, American Society of Landscape Architects.
Awesome. So everyone and anyone that's pretty much in the designing and architectural engineering space, right?
Well, it's basically the people who are identified in the Brooks Act, which is the architects and engineers professions, And
there's other societies, I'm sure, but that's a good list to be involved.
Oh, I think so. And clearly both of you have been doing well with the QBS Coalition yourselves, yeah?
Yeah, just remember, we're volunteers. We don't get compensated for it. It's just something that we do because we believe in. And I hear the music that you're exiting, but I do want to remind everybody to visit our website, QBSColorado.org.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you both on. Again, be sure to like and subscribe our YouTube page while you're here. Find this podcast and more at cobrt.com/radio-podcast. Visit QBSColorado.org. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.